The passage we've heard tonight from Matthew's Gospel presents us with the most famous sermon ever preached, the Sermon on the Mount. It wasn't a long homily. Jesus didn't use clever stories, amusing jokes, or vivid illustrations to make his point. Instead, he spoke simply and directly. But what Jesus said must have shocked his hearers beyond belief, just as it might still surprise us today if we truly listen to what it is that Jesus is trying to tell us. Because this simple little sermon suggests to us that things aren't really the way that many see them at all. Indeed, this sermon challenges many things people just assume to be true. For it is widely held that those who are affluent or famous or powerful or influential are the most blessed and fortunate in the world. Yet Jesus turns such widely held assumptions upside down by saying, no, it's the poor in spirit, the meek, the lowly, who are in fact the most blessed, the most fortunate of all. Such a proposition has to seem absurd in a world where so many are willing to spend any amount of effort in order to achieve quite the opposite, because we only have to turn on our televisions for half an hour and note what the products in the commercials are promising to help us achieve to know that poverty of spirit, meekness, and lowliness are just not found on the highly desired list. Indeed, it seems that the simple truths exposed in the Sermon on the Mount, while perhaps rather well known, are obviously not widely accepted or believed. For if these were, then wouldn't we be living in a rather very different world with far different values, dreams, and pursuits than the one that we find ourselves actually living in today? Indeed, compared with what is cherished and valued in the world, the truths proclaimed by Jesus in this sermon are in fact rejected by many. Yet those of us who wish to be numbered as his followers are challenged to find in these Beatitudes truths not only to be admired, but truths to be embraced and lived. And it isn't as impossible as it might initially seem. All we have to do is to take an honest look at ourselves as human beings before God. For no matter what is in our portfolio or bank account, we can all come to appreciate the truth that we are in fact finite, limited creatures, thus truly poor, completely impoverished before an immortal, all-powerful, eternal God. Indeed, no matter how influential or respected we may become in the world, in truth we are completely powerless and without rank when standing before the Almighty. No matter how self-sufficient and independent we might pride ourselves to be here and now, in fact, the truth is we are utterly dependent upon God for our very existence and upon his generosity and mercy for the blessings of a life that will be without end. If we can just recognize and accept these truths of our limitedness before God's omnipotence, then where in our hearts could there ever be room for pride? Indeed, we could not help but be poor in spirit, meek and lowly, even if we are well placed, greatly respected, and materially comfortable. Indeed, accepting the truths that underlie the Beatitudes that in fact precedes them puts us in right relationship with God as humble, grateful creatures before his infinite, awesome greatness. Once we are in right relationship with God, the rest of the Beatitudes come quite easily. For we would readily seek God above all else and desire the righteousness that comes from following his law rather than our own will, no matter the cost in doing so. Being in right relationship with God would lead us to gladly and generously share the blessings of his mercy and his peace with others, realizing that these are, in truth, the most precious gifts we have to offer. Yet accepting the values expressed in the Beatitudes has the unfortunate consequence of placing any who will in conflict with the values of the world and the many who would spend their time and their energy in pursuit of that pleasure, wealth, status, and power that the world values. So Jesus gives us very fair warning that those who take the Beatitudes to heart and try to put them into practice should expect to face some serious resistance in the process. And hasn't that proven true time and again throughout history, as indeed even in our own day, people who truly hold to the gospel often face ridicule, some imprisonment and martyrdom. Yet the last and greatest truth proclaimed by Jesus in this simple sermon is that the world is not meant to be our final judge, nor our ultimate destiny, but rather God and the joy of his kingdom is the final and unending blessing that awaits all who are faithful to Jesus. Let this truth then give us courage in joy and comfort in sorrow, and motivate us to continue the always challenging and often very difficult task of practicing these prescriptions for happiness. Happiness not only here, but hereafter, which are found in this, the simplest but most famous sermon ever preached.